So again, Anne, thank you so much. I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Anybody has any questions? I have a couple, but I'll wait to see if anybody else has any other questions first. So anybody?
Yeah, I had this, Peter, and it was great. It's really interesting because I've had a long-standing interest in caustics and doing encaustics, but I've been hesitant because of the toxicity of it. Yep. And I live in New Hampshire, so I have the same problem with you can only do it certain times of the year. Yep. And like during ice fishing season, I guess would be the right time. So but I'm encouraged by that. I also do a lot with Procreate. So there's a lot of, I found that, but so I guess my question is, in terms of encaustics, I know you had the exhaust fan. What else do you do? And I noticed that because what I read was it's the most dangerous part is if you put the dry, sometimes can be the dry pigments with the wax. That's hard, but if you buy them pre-manufactured. So how did you approach that? I mean, that's because I'd love to do it, but my wife says she has issues with it so far. She said, prove to me that it's safe. So
the dry pigments, you should be wearing a mask and you should have gloves. And because even when you think, oh, everything is under control, and there are particles that you don't see that will just fly. Yeah, it's very important. But once it's in the medium, there's no more issues. And for the ventilation, that's, the ideal installation would be an extractor, just like actually the RNF studio, they're set up with a light artist, and they have this tube coming down and very close to the heating plate. That would be the ideal situation, but it would mean for me to push my island to the wall and lose access to the wall. So it's complicated. I'm still debating about how I could do that, connect a tube and have it hanging over the central island. It's a possibility in the future, but definitely I make sure that I have a breeze. And as soon as I start smelling something, I walk out of the room and I let the flow of the air clear the air, because sometimes the plate, which is just a regular griddle, that you do your fried eggs and warm up your sausages. All of a sudden it gets very hot, even when the control is not that precise. And if you see fumes, you see blue, that's really bad. So you walk out, you let it clear, and you come back. I don't. Paula Rowland, when I took her workshop, was really diligent about that. She's a veteran of painting with encaustic, like 30 years and more. And she really stressed the point that you have to be careful with the medium.
Sometimes I work with encaustic myself, and ventilation is always a concern. You don't always smell when things are not right, but I use little portable extractors, as well as a major ventilation system in my studio. And the little portable extractors you can place wherever you want. And I tend to put mine around my griddle area. And they have a HEPA filter. So I also use them when I'm grinding up resin. They're just a really nice little way to control things that may not seem to get out of control. So, and they're portable.
Yeah.
And they're not expensive. You have to change the HEPA filters, obviously, but so that's also another method to help control toxicity with that material. But I don't know, any of us who work with encaustic would say, oh my, it's so worth it, because it's a very beautiful medium, the most versatile medium. Yeah, it's really very special.
I concur with that. I see Anna with your hands up.
Yeah, so Anne, thank you so much for that incredible presentation. I really enjoyed seeing how, your studio space, which is way more organized than mine. I mean, you've got everything in its little nooks and crannies. And I live in an old house, old bungalow, and I use the living room, dining room space.
There you go.
So
few of-
they're a combined space, but I don't have the ability to, if I were to outfit a wall like you do, I wouldn't have a painting wall.
Mhm.
So I only have one wall in my studio that can be a painting wall, and there's too many windows. And anyway, that's a long story. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate seeing other artists' spaces, because I think you really hit on something there, that a lot of times your space informs how you work. And I think that that is true. You know, the smaller the space, obviously the smaller the work, or you have to work in segments and then they have to be assembled, you know, offsite, you know, which you've done with your assemblage work. So, and I also found it very fascinating about you getting involved in public engagement within the work. So I've done some public art projects. In fact, I've done a lot of them here in Chattanooga. And it's one of the rewarding ways where you can get to know your community. You can get to know other artists through collaboration. I went through the grant process to make that happen where I live. So I don't know if Saskatchewan has that available, if they have a public art
Oh, yeah, actually.
forum where you can apply.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that the two projects, Voix de Passage and also the project Memory of the Sun, I received both a big grant for the projects. Otherwise, I would not have been able to go forward with them. Yes.
Right. So that's beautiful. I'm glad that they do that. So getting to my question, I'm fascinated about your manipulation of landscape. And so I would like for you to talk a little bit more about what motivates the cross pollination that you're doing between both digital and encaustic over existing photographs. They feel a little bit like dream imagery also. And so is that part of your process? And then I also see, based on your interactive work, that you're also dipping your toe into conceptual art as well. And so I would like you to talk a little bit more about how all these elements come together with these interactive landscapes, or intervention, or whatever the term you used was really
Yes.
great.
Oh, thank you. That's such a lovely question. Dreamlike. Yes. I guess it's because I've mentioned I studied history. So I'm very much in tune with the idea of the past and the passage of time, and how things are never fixated, like it's things change. And the landscape is an interesting element to me, because at first glance it looks like it's going to be there forever, and it's not changing, but it's not true. Definitely not. And especially when there's urbanization and we're encroaching on the natural landscape, but then even the natural landscape is always evolving. So I guess maybe that's what's coming through. And I realized at some point that this layered approach to the work and using all sorts of ways of creating stratification is very much like geology and the superposition of time again, and eras. I see relationship in there. And the other thing too is I think I've come to a point where I don't accept limits. And I remember maybe 20 years ago, I had this question mark of, am I a painter? But then I kept doing photography and printing. Okay, how do I present myself? And finally I realized, why bother? First of all, I don't think labels are useful. And if I'm going to settle for a label, better be a label that is encompassing a no border kind of approach, and this is it.
It's a good way to put it. Yeah. So I think multimedia is a good term that you came up with. I do just American abstract artist because
Mhm.
that just encompasses
Your language,
as much as it can for that same reason. So I really get that with you. Does dreams ever come into your process, do you think, or are you not conscious of it while you're working?
Well, it's a good another very good question. Not consciously, like I don't keep a journal, and mind you, when I was younger, I used to wake up and have these very vivid images, and I would take down notes down, and I wrote stories concerning dreams of mine. But I haven't found a way of taking that kind of process and putting it so consciously into the visual work. But I suspect,
I think you're already doing it already.
yeah,
My point
okay.
is because we're all like the sum total of who we are and where we've been as artists. So, you know, like with my background, it was graphic design and illustration, and that's why I'm so heavily into Photoshop with what I do, and it informs how I am. So I think you just touched on a little key element there, that you had these vivid dreams that you would, you know, derive stories from. And of course, you had your former career also as a journalist. So whether you're recognizing it consciously, I think it's there. I think it's in the work.
Oh, thank you so much. Again, Alan said to me when we were preparing the forum that the beauty of these conversations is having the opportunity to have a fresh perspective on our own work, and this is what just happened. Thank you. And I see another Anne who has a question.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, I
Yes.
do.
Again, thanks for stopping by and showing us all this great stuff. I'm really an abstract photographer. I don't really do a lot of painting or printing or anything, but I'm really interested in the idea that I heard on our last session. Another artist was talking about her visual language, and I heard you say that, but I missed. Did you say your visual language is abstraction?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And the visual, it's like there's symbolism, there's minimalism, and depending on the mood, it can be very expressive or it can be very geometrical and structured. So abstraction sums it up. Sorry.
Okay, because I do a lot of writing on my own. I studied history too.
Oh, there you go.
Wow, this lady is really getting it. And do you find like this? The previous artist talked about her visual language and sort of the personal narrative. I mean, she had kind of a philosophy that she was saying, this is sort of what informs all of my work, and this is my language. And she sort of had to translate parts of that for those of us that were listening, where she's saying, I use these kinds of symbols because this reflects something in my life. Do you have that, and can you kind of share that with us?
Yes, a visual language and the idea of having a narrative within, well, we're back to telling stories. It's fundamentally, to me, being a visual artist is communication. So there needs to be a language, and that language is images. That sometimes it bothers me when there's so much pressure for explanation when an image says so much and has more openness in terms of how you receive it, how the public receives it. But nonetheless, intentions and how you envision it is also important. And after that, when the work is done and it's out there, then it has its own life. I believe in that too. So in terms of, I do have symbolism. This little shape, some people call it a house, but with the experience of the prairies, it can definitely be an Anglican rural church. It can be a barn. It can be a granary. And I had people standing in front of one of these works and cry their eyes out because it reminded them of some story about their father, and it was these shapes were sort of floating and flying. So the father had passed away not that long ago. So I do have that shape, and I'm not bored again. I'm not bored yet with it. And depending on the context of it, it takes on more spiritual meaning, or it's more anchored to a reference to what's out there and what people can latch onto. And then after that, just appreciate what's the offering of the composition of the work. Because, well, to be honest, abstraction often takes people aback, like they don't always feel comfortable with having a dialogue with an abstract work, and we constantly have to sort of well, I'll say educate, but you know, I don't use that word in a sense that I don't want to put down people. It's just a matter of okay, let me give you my understanding of what I use as abstraction. Other symbol, I've done studies with the shape of a boat. It appeared at some point, and it seems like it wants to have a life of its own. So I suspect it will show up in other works. So there definitely is things that come back, and that would be also part of the language, definitely. Yeah, and the lines are the swivel. It was really evident when we were hanging the work in the Art Gallery of Regina, the very last project. And when the performer came in and she mentioned the lines, and they used an assemblage of these close-ups of the lines because there was so much energy into it. And the number that really referenced my work was very fast-paced and all, and which was an interesting take, because in essence, a piece of work on paper is very static to start with. So that's the magic of what's going on in the image.
Well, another question I had was then, having said all of that, the visual language is really more, it's imagery more than words. How much time and text, either written or digital, do you spend in explaining or offering, context or explanation for what you do? I mean, it seems like we're having this discussion about how much should you, talk about your personal symbology, or how often do you want to do that? Do you want to title things? This is kind of a big struggle that I'm going on with this other group that I'm in, where we're like, well, when do you do it and how much? So your professional opinion, when do you do it and how much?
Oh, you broached the subject of titles. I so admire people who are able to have these poems into their titles. I'm just in awe. I don't find myself very original with my titles, and I tend to have words that sometimes I find almost too descriptive, but it does the job. And it's because otherwise I'd be untitled.
Yeah.
No.
That's hard to keep track of. My friend says, make it untitled. I'm going, which untitled? I have 50 works back here. Let's.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, I need a title just for organization purposes, but also you don't want it to be, sometimes it's too descriptive, or it narrows it somehow. So I'm like, okay, dilemma, and then numbering doesn't help. I'm a math idiot. I can't do that. So,
and in my case, I have to mention that I always have my titles are bilingual, because being francophone is part of my identity, and it's very important to me. And every chance I have to talk about my work in French as much as in English, I do it. The Francophone community in Saskatchewan is a minority, so it's important to be contributing, but in my perspective. So again, if I have a poem in English, then I have a poem in French. So it becomes a bit of an issue for the length of the label, and then the curators are not too happy with me. So again, we're back to language, and the image solves it. And explaining, do I do a lot of explaining? I do enjoy doing tours, and depending on are they adults and are they children, it's not the same discussion. And I'm always floored by how quick kids are, and by how open they are, and they see things, and they go somewhere with that, and I love that. It's also a way of that kind of contact and exchange. Maybe we can find that tiresome sometimes, but I think it's important to evolve as an artist, to understand how the public receives the work, and grow as a human being.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for your questions. Yeah.
I just have a question. When you're talking about encaustics, you explained that there's 3 different methods. I was really curious. So when you sit down to do one, what method do you choose? Is it just intuitive, or do you have like a specific way of approaching it?
That will it depends on the time constraint. It depends on the colors I want, because sometimes the palette is available in these oil sticks, and that's the best way of just having the color added to the palette. And then, especially if I'm just in the middle of a painting session, encaustic is a quick affair. As soon as you leave the well of melted colors, it just solidifies. So you have to be quick to apply it to the surface and spread it, and again fuse it. And so mixing colors, it's not the ideal situation when you all of a sudden you run out of the color, or you need a new one. Or so the stick, the oil stick, and the medium is the quickie basically. Mixing the dry pigments is usually I do a proper session to do that. And that's to prepare a future session of painting, because again, you need precautions, the mask, the gloves, the ventilation. Mind you, I shut down, I reduce the volume of the ventilation so that it's not flying all over the place either. It's a delicate balance there. And there's not as much there's not as much quantity of medium being heated, and not as much fumes. So it's keeping that in mind. But that's a very interesting question, because it all depends on context, timing, and usually I prefer to prepare the colors ahead of time, so that I'm not caught in a situation where I ran out, I'm in trouble. Well, I can always stop and think, regroup like a general.
And then a second unrelated question. So on your south wall where you hang your work, are they mostly finished pieces, or are they works in progress? Or do you think they're finished and you just want to sit with them to see where you want to go with it? Or I'm curious about that too.
Yeah. Yeah, the wall is very important. It's an idea that I got while visiting the studio of someone else. Claudine Odette-Rozon's a painter based in Saskatoon, and she had that wall with the opening and movable hooks, and I thought, this is genius. So went into the list of the planning of the studio, because before we build the space, it was at the very least 3 years in the planning of coming back and forth with an engineer to develop the plan and how to attach it to the house. And I have to say that in the end, it's a conversation with a friend who's an architect who finally gave me a lot of solutions. And the wall being on the southern part receives good light. And what I hang there, in the videos, you've seen finished work mostly, but I often have works that are just in the middle of their evolution. And that's the most precious thing that I gain, having access to the space, even for 10 minutes in a day when it's busy with other projects, is walking in and all of a sudden looking at the work with fresh eyes. It's just, and sometimes I turn them around on the floor and then I hang them again. And it's like, oh, here you are. You're new to me. and I love the fact that for some time, I might have no solution. I know the piece is stuck, or I don't know where to go from that point. I don't know if it's stuck necessarily, but it's just at a point where I don't know where it should be going. And then I see it. It's fascinating. So you need a place where you can indeed meditate on the work and give yourself a chance of rediscovering the work. So a little bit of a wall where you hang stuff, or a little chevalet where you can put the work, is really, really key. I suspect our brain is always working, and while it's in the studio, your brain is working out solutions. And when you see it again, then it's, I can do this. Of course, when you're in the process of working on the piece as well, solutions do come along. I mean, it's experience, it's a mixture of knowing how to do stuff and happy accidents and all of that, and being open to that. But yeah, often unfinished work on that wall, and I'm so happy to have it. And because I don't receive people in the studio that often. I don't sell out of the studio because I'm represented by galleries, so I don't need to have finished work so that people can visit and buy. I understand others do have this obligation, so I can definitely have plenty of stuff that's in the middle of chaos, and it can be there for the longest time.
Great. So we're nearing the end. Does anybody else have any last minute questions?
There's
Is this to be offered recorded? I kind of missed out. Yeah, I'll take a look at the
This is recorded and it'll be available on YouTube within a day or two. So,
Okay.
And for what it's worth, this is the 11th one we will have on YouTube. So if you want to see any past talks we've had, I'm happy to send links to anybody who asks for it. Peter and I are actually building a nice library, and this is really great because it was such a different perspective, and to peek inside and studio the way we did was really a privilege. I mean, that's the word that comes to my mind, so I think in a different life, Anne could have been a professional organizer. It was almost intimidating how organized she was. but it was really
So I had one more question for you, Anne. So, you mentioned briefly that you were in TV producing, you ended up in that end of journalism, I guess.
Yes, yeah.
Do you think that experience played a key role in you doing more interactive exhibitions with the public? And of course, that's going to play into what you're doing, overall. But yeah, did that happen? I mean, did you have the thought, okay, why not produce something that can be interactive, and with my background in producing, I can make it happen?
Oh, definitely. There's like I wasn't scared of thinking along those lines because I felt familiar with some of the techniques that were needed to accomplish that. Mind you, the projection, the slide projection is more about photography. And let me tell you, this was a very challenging project because it's obsolete technology. And because of the pandemic, there's a shortage of films. There's a shortage of slide films. There's a shortage of places to develop the film. And even I found 2 labs in Canada, and the one that I chose because the time frame was shorter, it ended up not being able to mount the slides anymore. They found that out right in the middle, and it was so cute because the staff member phoned me and said, "We really begged them because we know it's an art project," but they ran out of the mount. And but thank God, someone in Regina had older unused frames, so I ended up mounting them myself.
Wow.
Yeah, so that the whole thing. And also, yeah, and I also found a wonderful laboratory lab in San Francisco. Kudos to them because they take digital files and they transform them into analog slides. We're used to the reverse, people taking their old ones and wanting them to be digitalized and printed and whatnot.
Slides right here.
There we go. And I was able to spot only 2. The second one was in London, England. So I did business with the lab in San Francisco, and that allowed me to have a different collection. The collection that was done, analog collection, was a blind experience. You take the picture and you don't know what they're going to look like.
Right.
You receive them weeks later, and yeah, and then I had to cut them and mount them, and so it was a learning curve. And even if I had the know-how in terms of photography, it was a whole different ball game. The project with the soundscape, of course, I felt at home because I'd done plenty of multi-tracks editing. So I was at home putting together interviews, archives from my grandmother and my mom's interview and my daughter's monologue and my singing. And then there was also sounds that were evocating images. Very proud of these soundscapes. They were about 3 minutes each. And like I said, there were 4 different of them. And so when people approached the work, it would be random. One of them would be playing. And that was part of the program again, that David implanted into the sound system. So grateful also for meeting people that helped me along the way. The project, the Memories of the Sun, I sat down with an artist who's more into conceptual work and has experience with audio and projection, and she used more digital projection. But she had played with vintage projectors. And so she had a few good pointers, and that kind of conversation where I felt not as experienced. I went out there and I found help. And actually the grant included money to sit down with her and pay her the fee so that she was able to consult, to be the consultant of the project. So it's
I did a
win-win situation.
I did a grant too, where we had to I collaborated with a local artist, and we actually designed and we painted oval. I did collage, she did silk painting, and we put them in aluminum ovals. And I designed this mobile, and it's this giant mobile that's in the convention center downtown. We got a grant for this, and we had to set aside money for the guy that built the armature. So I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of collaboration, but I think you hit on the key phrase that I wanted to pull out of that little question is you didn't have a fear of going after producing something that had these interactive elements because of your production background and producing background. So I think that's a key for a lot of artists is fear. of the unknown, and just kind of getting over that hurdle, I think can be huge. So thank you for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
This is
But
wonderful.
I will run with what you just mentioned. I think fear, we have to sometimes learn to live with it and accept that there will be uncomfortable moments in the process. And when you're feeling low and you feel like, my God, what did I get myself into? And I will never have enough time. But you have to be confident in the vision. And in the end, that's something that I realized not that long ago, is that yes, there is a plan on paper or a vision in your head, but nobody else knows what it should be looking like at the end of this long journey. So of course it should be up to par, it should be quality, you should be proud of what you want, you create in the end. But I think the fear comes from, what will people think?
Mhm.
And I think that's the biggest hurdle, and we don't need that kind of hurdle. But the uncomfortable feeling of being in the chaos and wondering about the timeline and wondering about the know-how, well, you're learning. That's the thing. You're learning and you're growing as an artist. And I realized, okay, I might be out of breath once in a while, but it's exciting too. And it's so rewarding at the end. Yes, Liz. Yeah.
What I heard from that is that you were working with your strengths also. Like, I think there's fear, and then there's like, holy crap, there's a chasm here. I think it's fun to push out in some areas, but also why not just go with your strengths? If math isn't it, fine. If production is it, great. I mean, I'm a crap storyteller. That's my focus for this year, is I wouldn't have known how to do your job. So I love that you're pulling on those strengths and then branching out into areas and getting help in the other parts of it. Really appreciate that.
Thank you. That's a wonderful comment. Yeah, strength, knowing ourselves, knowing what we can build on. And at some point, the stuff that we don't know will be getting into the toolbox. It will land into the toolbox, and then you can go to the next thing. I have no idea where I go from here. I'm just fooling around in the studio right now, doing gouaches and very abstracted drawing in the morning, but I'm sure something is just decanting right now, and I'm confident there's something that will come along. Ideas, it's out there for the grab. Thank you so much for being part of this adventure. I'm beautiful people. It's reassuring knowing that with such a wonderful invitation from Alan and Peter, that we belong to a community, and this is a time we gave ourselves to be part of a community. I thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, man. I so appreciate you being willing to do this. So it was really a wonderful presentation. So thank you so much.
Okay. Have a good weekend, everybody.